If you thought Ohio State versus Texas couldn't get any bigger, the stakes just rose again. This was already one of the games that could shape the 2026 season the most in college football. And now Ohio State, who is going to Austin in this game, Texas gets another shot at the Buckeyes, two teams with national title expectations. But recent developments on both sides are now colliding with some of the biggest unanswered questions for the Buckeyes and some of them for the Texas Longhorns instead. So instead of just giving you like 5 pieces of news or something like that, we're going to go through what's happening, some a bit older, some a lot more recent. I want to show you why all of this points toward the same thing, that Texas is becoming the first real referendum on what this Ohio State team actually is and what this Ohio State team could be in the future as well, because there's also the 5th point, which is recruiting involved in this episode too. So by the time the game is over, we may know whether Arthur Smith really changed the offense, whether Ohio State can really trust its offensive line, whether Matt Patricia is going to be able to create pressure without second proven star edge rusher, and whether Texas can use this game to make a life uncomfortable for Ohio State on the recruiting trail. And that part does matter. That last part does matter because there is an Ohio State 5-star commitment who is literally planning to visit Austin while Texas is trying to flip him. We'll get there. But in the meantime, I'm John Rhodes. This is the Buckeye Huddle podcast, Ohio State coverage built for Buckeye fans like you, talking about the stories that matter most to you. Let's start with the development that Ohio State's offense an opportunity that they can take advantage of. All right. So Texas lost. This is number one. Texas lost a major defensive piece last week. Texas dismissed starting linebacker Ty Anthony Smith, and I don't think this is one of those stories where we just say, well, one player gone, next man up, and move on. Smith was productive, and I know the Texas fans will tell you he wasn't going to play anyway, and we got better without him, but last season he had 59 tackles, 2 sacks, forced fumble, a fumble recovery, and 2 interceptions. The last number matters because Texas used him in coverage quite a bit. He wasn't just a downhill linebacker who could replace with another big body and just call it even. A lot of linebackers who are good in coverage are not as easy to replace sometimes. And here's why this raises the stakes for Ohio State, because Texas already had issues defending the pass last season. The Longhorns finished 97th nationally in passing yards allowed per game at nearly 235 passing yards per game. So now you take a defense that already had something to prove in coverage and remove a veteran linebacker who was a huge part of covering, tight ends, linebackers, sometimes wide receivers, and you take him out of the back end. Arthur Smith should see that as an invitation to be able to go after some of these linebackers, especially with some of the guys you have in this team who are as athletic and freaky as a Legend Bay. Maybe you get to one of your other tight ends, maybe a Bennett Christian, maybe a Hunter Welsing we could see a little bit in this one. Definitely going to see Nate Roberts, of course. This is, this is not an invitation to throw the ball 55 times a game. That's not what I'm saying, nor do I think that Ohio State is better off that way. But this is going to be talked about. Can Ohio State get the backs matched up against these linebackers? Can the tight ends stress the middle of the field? Can Arthur Smith use motion and personnel to force Texas into trying to declare their coverage? Can he get Jeremiah Smith in the ball in space instead of asking him to win every snap? Boy, if you can get Jeremiah Smith on a linebacker in the slot or something like that, that would be huge. And that would give Ohio State, obviously, the perfect opportunity for yards after the catch, which has been so important and something they've been talking about so much this offseason. Ohio State has been emphasizing more yards after the catch, and Texas has not always made it easy to unleash Jeremiah Smith in this matchup. With an offensive coordinator and one less veteran defender in the middle, there is now an obvious question hanging over this game. Can Arthur Smith find the weakness and attack it. I trust that he'll be able to. And we also need to reference too, they don't have Pete Kwiatkowski as their defensive coordinator anymore. They moved on to a new defensive coordinator, Will Muschamp, who is more of a front seven type of guy. You know, Kwiatkowski was more of kind of the back end coverage type of guy. That was one of the reasons why Texas did such a good job of defending against Jeremiah Smith, is because of the way he was able to bracket coverage and coach the secondary there. This Texas defense is going to have some strengths in some different areas. So even for Arthur Smith to go back and say, you know, rewatch the Texas game from last year and see what their defense was doing, of course there could be some similarities there. This is the same, not the same, but this is Texas that was last year. They did bring in some new players, but they've also got some of the same old players as well. So you do have an opportunity to kind of investigate that, but we'll see. It's going to be very interesting to see how the passing game does without one of the best linebacker coverage pieces for Texas on the team. Whether he was going to win the job or not, he's not on the team anymore, and that's interesting. Number 2, Ohio State's offensive line gets almost no grace period. The offensive line competition may finally be settling down. If you've been following me on X or Twitter, which I encourage you to do so. I try to post stuff there at least 2 or 3 times a day, so go on over and follow me, JRS_rankings. That's JR's rankings over there on Twitter X, posting lists and stuff like that. Would love to interact with you if you come over there. Thanks for doing that if you already do follow me. But the schedule is not giving Ohio State much time to enjoy it. The Ian Moore, Austin Seyerveld configuration that emerged after scrimmage number 2 appears to be the combination to watch. We've been talking about this and how this is most likely going to happen for some time now with Ian Moore, how well he played against Miami and stuff, but it seems to be solidifying more now, and I do believe you will see Ian Moore out there starting at left tackle against Ball State. And speaking of Ball State should give us confirmation that this is really the preferred 5, but that's not the problem, but also something to look at, because you're basically going, okay, this is what our offensive line looks like, to now get ready for Austin, Texas, right? Ball State can tell you whether the communication is clean. It can tell you whether Ian Moore looks comfortable at left tackle. It can tell you whether the interior gets movement and whether Julian Saint is getting through the game without people in his lap. What Ball State can't recreate, that Texas can, is it cannot recreate the crowd noise. Like, if you have great communication against Ball State, congratulations. But one thing that happened last year a few times, including in that Miami game, was you had to go to a silent count. They also went to a silent count against Indiana in that Big Ten championship game too, and that hinders your offensive line from doing that. So Arthur Smith and Tyler Bowen need to make sure that's not something they try to rely on again, because your offensive line is just simply not going to play as well when you're doing that to them. So Ball State's not going to show us if they are or not going to go into a silent count and how they'll react to the crowd noise of Texas. The speed off the edge and the 3rd and 8s and things like that are going to be different as well. And that's why I'm not really interested in whether Ohio State lines, their defensive line or offensive line, primarily the offensive line, that's what we're talking about right now, looks dominant against Ball State. I want it to look organized, obviously, clean protection, no free runners, no dumb penalties, no obvious communication breakdowns, because the real exam comes 1 week later. Camp has been generally encouraging. This is an experienced group, over 1,000 career snaps combined with the starters coming in, right, or the projected starters that we have coming in right now. I don't expect poor offensive line play, poor offensive line fundamentals, and the line will be working pretty well from what we've heard. But even that conversation ends in the same place of basically saying, we'll see what it looks like against Texas, and that's a fair way to end it, because we will not truly know what this offensive line looks like until we get to that Texas game, and that game is either going to give us a whole lot of optimism or a whole lot of concern. So the question is whether Ohio State has finally built an offensive line that can travel, that doesn't get impacted too much by the noise and doesn't have to go to the silent count. It's going to be very interesting to see what Arthur Smith does with these guys and how this operates. Number 3, this is a huge opportunity for Ohio State's pass rush. I just mentioned the defensive line a little bit in the last segment there. Now, what opportunity is Matt Patricia and these guys going to take with the pass rush? This might be the Ohio State question that I'm most interested in this game against Texas. The Buckeyes have defensive in-depth. Obviously, Kenyatta Jackson is the established guy. Then you have Bo Atkinson, Quay Russaw, Zion Grady, Epi Satanale, five-star freshman Kari Wilder, who has generated some camp buzz as of late. I think last week was when he got his black stripe off. So that's a lot of options, but options and answers are not always the same thing. Ohio State still needs somebody to become a consistent, disruptive player opposite of Kenyatta Jackson. If nobody can win one-on-one, or I shouldn't say nobody can win, if you don't have a player who can consistently win one-on-one, Matt Patricia has to manufacture pressure with some extra players. And Patricia can absolutely change the picture. He can disguise where pressure's coming from. He can bring a linebacker, drop a lineman. He can use simulated pressure, make an offensive line sort through multiple possible rushers before the snap. There is a cost, though, to all of those things. The more creative you have to become just to create pressure, the more stress you're putting on everything else behind you. Now, Matt Patricia does a great job of being creative, but limiting those stresses on everybody else with how he coaches his defense and how smart the Ohio State players are. So it's not necessarily something I'm super concerned about. But again, when you're going up against an elite team like Texas, a top 5 team in the country in the AP preseason poll, then you are definitely looking at that and saying, okay, what are the deficiencies and how is that going to affect this game? So the best case scenario is still simple. Somebody's going to win. And that's why Texas is such a big opportunity. Now, you do remember that Trevor Gooseby had the knee injury, and there has already been uncertainty about whether he would be fully healthy for Ohio State. A lot of Texas people right now saying that he will be healthy. This is not a super fresh development, but it is something we're continuing to keep our eye on. Even if he does play, though, with the bone bruise, I say knee injury, I think it was a bone bruise. Even if he does play with that's still an injury that can linger and make it harder for you. Obviously, we don't want anybody being hurt, but it's the reality of college football. It's the reality of playing offensive line, and that could affect things for Texas. Now, the fresh development here is that veteran offensive lineman Cole Hudson is eligible to play despite participating in NFL minicamps. You would think, well, probably not because of the SEC rule that they put in place, no NFL players, but Hudson never formally declared for the draft, never signed an NFL contract, and was never placed on an NFL roster. So he does not violate the SEC's new policy, similar to how Trent Hendrick at UCLA does not violate the Big Ten policy on this either. He's played 48 career games with 23 starts, including 10 starts last season, and that gives Texas experienced insurance, but Hudson is not currently projected to start, and his return does not erase the larger point that Texas may be a little more vulnerable up front than it would prefer to be for this game. So what does Matt Patricia do? Does he trust his 4-man pressure? Does he move Kenyatta Jackson around? Does he use Riley Pettijohn? Boy, he's getting a lot of praise right now. Was talking to somebody behind the scenes earlier today, and man, they are just raving about Riley Pettijohn and how good he's looked, not just because of how good he's looked physically, but also what he's doing on the field despite missing spring. You can tell that boy was doing his homework in the spring. Just because he wasn't on the field, he was not behind at all, which credit to him and credit to James Laurinaitis. But anyway, do they use Riley Pettijohn as like another athletic pressure threat, force Texas to guess which linebackers come in, which ones drop in, and you got options for that. Peyton Pierce can blitz for you, Christian Allegro, Riley Pettijohn. I'd be encouraged if we see Sincere Johnson. You're probably going to see TJ Alford in this game too. But here's the line for me. If Ohio State gets after Texas, one of the biggest preseason concerns could disappear immediately. But If Texas enters with some uncertainty up front and Ohio State still cannot affect the quarterback without repeatedly sending extra bodies, that concern becomes much bigger than, bigger when you play Oregon, Michigan, or the playoffs arrive. And I mean, I could name the entire schedule at this point with how difficult it is, but you know what I'm saying. Texas is the laboratory where we find out whether Matt Patricia has enough pass rush or whether it needs to be invented. Number 4, Arthur Smith's offense gets its first real verdict. You can tell me all offseason that Ohio State is going to be more physical in the run game, and I believe you. Trust me, I believe that Arthur Smith is going to do that, but we are going to need to see it shown to us against Texas. Bo Jackson ran for 1,000+ yards as a freshman, and he took another step forward this August with how he's been playing. The interior offensive line has experienced players in Luke Montgomery, Carson Hinsman, Austin Siereveld, and Arthur Smith has built his offensive reputation around being willing to run the football and build complementary offense off of that. So the ingredients are there, but the question was never whether Ohio State can run against Ball State. The question is whether Ohio State can run it on 3rd and 2 in Austin when Texas knows exactly what's coming. Can they run it in the red zone? Can they pick up the yards they need to pick up? And I want to be clear because this gets oversimplified sometimes. Ohio State does not need 250 rushing yards for me to say the run game is working well. Can the Buckeyes stay ahead of the chains is what I want to know. Can they get 4 or 5 yards when the box is favorable? Can they convert short yardage? Can they run inside for 10 yards? Can they make a 5-yard run look like a 45-yard run because of the explosiveness of their running backs? Can they protect Julian Sayin from living in 3rd and long? Can they take the 4th quarter lead and make Texas try to tackle Bo Jackson when everybody in the stadium already knows he's getting the football? That's what a championship running game looks like. Not averaging 250 yards a game. I mean, obviously that'd be nice. I don't think anybody's saying no to that, but it's about in the moment when you need to get the ball 2, 3, 4 yards. Can you get the ball there? And it changes the math for your quarterback. It changes how linebackers play. It changes how safeties fit the run. And when those safeties are creeping forward, now you've got Jeremiah Smith who has room outside. The red zone piece may be especially important too. The latest discussion around Ohio State has been that the red zone offense is making progress with the running game inside the 10 and even quarterback run viewed as potential ways to help. That's where Arthur Smith can change Ohio State the most. Not by just making offense boring or anything like that, but by making it harder to defend. If Texas can sit back, play coverage, and trust Ohio State will eventually abandon the run, then not enough has changed for the Buckeyes. But if Texas has to respect Bo Jackson, Isaiah West, even Julian Sayin and his legs in the play action game while also dealing with Ohio State's insane wide receivers, now there is no comfortable answer for them on defense, and Will Muschamp will be pulling his hair out trying to stop these guys, which I don't want to see the man without any hair, but I do want to see maybe a little bit of stressing from the Texas defensive coordinator saying, oh my gosh, how are we going to stop these guys? All right, number 5, Ohio State will be defending a 5-star commitment during the game. Spoke about this a little bit at the beginning. That is one Marcus Fakatu, who plans to be at the Ohio State-Texas game on a visit with Texas. The 5-star defensive lineman is committed to Ohio State, but Texas never stopped recruiting him. Will Muschamp and, you might also recognize the name, Alan Clark, have kept the relationship alive, and Fakatu said that because they continued showing him love after his commitment, he felt it was right to show that love back by taking a visit. That doesn't mean he's flipping or anything like that, and let me say that again because recruiting conversations get out of control fast and nobody really trusts a commitment nowadays. The current information is that Fakatu is solid with Ohio State. But you would be crazy to pretend that setting does not matter here. This is one of Ohio State's most important defensive line commitments. The Ohio State defensive line recruiting has been outstanding, and he's going to be sitting in He's going to be sitting in Austin while Texas is actively trying to convince him that he should eventually play there. And the opponent on the field, is Ohio State. So think about what he could see if Ohio State's defensive line creates havoc. Kenyatta Jackson's winning, younger linemen are flashing, Matt Patricia putting the players in position to attack, and Ohio State walks out with a win. Larry Johnson has a pretty easy conversation ahead. You just watched the vision, but flip the scenario. Could be what Texas tries to pull if this game does not go well for Ohio State. Now, I will say that like Ohio State losing this game doesn't mean they're going to lose Marcus Fakatu. Like that, I think that gets oversimplified sometimes in recruiting nowadays. And this isn't a recruiting show, but we're going to mention it and talk about it because it's relevant for the game. But it would be a piece of what Texas might bring up if the defensive line for Texas looks incredible and the defensive line for Ohio State, whether they aren't getting sacks, they aren't getting pressure, whatever it might be. So when Ohio State goes to Austin, do not just watch the scoreboard. Watch whether Arthur Smith attacks the middle of a changed Texas defense. Watch whether Ohio State's new offensive line travels. Watch how Matt Patricia creates pressure and whether somebody emerges opposite of Kenyatta Jackson. And watch whether the Buckeyes can run when Texas knows they want to run it. And finally, remember, I just said and earlier, sorry, but finally, remember that one of Ohio State's 5-star commitments will be watching this game as well on the field right there with them. So Ohio State can lose this game and still have a great season. There's no doubt there, but the Buckeyes go into Austin, and if they can answer these questions properly, we've got a lot of optimism for the team going into the rest of the year. My final question for you: which of these 5 developments matters most to you against Texas? Run game, defensive line, all those things. You know, does the recruiting of Marcus Fakatu matter a lot to you? Would love to know your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe for more Buckeye football analysis and talk here on the Buckeye Huddle podcast. You can also, if you're watching on YouTube, subscribe, like the video, subscribe here on youtube.com/Buckeye Huddle. All right, everybody, we appreciate you being here. Thanks for listening and watching. Have a good one. We'll see you next time.